Good evening. You're very welcome to our webinar, the Irish Women's Lobby's webinar, Imprisoned for Profit, Ireland's Institutional Exploitation of Women and Children. You're very welcome to join us here on this beautiful summer's evening, and thank you for taking the time. I know August, the last days of autumn are calling to us, so thank you again for joining us. Well, tonight we're joined by three incredible women who have been at the forefront of the campaigning to actually bring some kind of recognition and justice to those who have suffered so badly in our institutions, and in this case in particular, the mother and baby homes. We're honoured to have them with us to share their experiences and their knowledge. First of all, we'll be joined by Anna Corrigan, and following that we'll have Annette McKay, and then we will be having a brief, we will be talking, having a question and answer session with both Anna and Annette, and then we will be listening to a pre-recording which has been done for us very kindly by Beth Wallace. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us this evening, so she managed to find time in her busy schedule, and she pre-recorded a session with me, and we're absolutely delighted that she can, if you like, be here with us virtually at any rate. And she does have a little follow-up with questions afterwards. Then we'll be going back, not exactly to the studio, but we'll be signing off then at that stage. And I will just be sharing Beth's Twitter handle with everyone, so that if they want to talk to Beth afterwards and share their thoughts and questions with her following the viewing of her video contribution. So, as we said, we're going to be talking about the institutional exploitation of women and children, and in particular we'll be focusing on the mother and baby homes. But I just want to give a little bit of context, some numbers to that, before we get into the detail with the wonderful participants, the wonderful women who joined us. So between 1922 and 1998, 56,000 women went through the mother and baby homes. And there was a part of a kind of a network that could be described as a network of coercive confinement. It included reformatory and industrial schools, psychiatric hospitals, and county homes, which were formerly the workhouses. The Ryan report found that between the 1930s and the 1970s, 42,000 children passed through reformatories and industrial schools. The McAleese report found that 10,000, although some think it's 11,000, women were basically incarcerated in the Magdalen laundries, providing unpaid forced labour. So the proportion of women we had in mother and babies homes here in Ireland were probably the highest in the world, was the finding. And in the 1920s, we had more children in industrial schools in the Irish Free State than both England and Wales combined. In 1966, we had the highest percentage of psychiatric patients in the world. There's no doubt about it that this was indeed an institutionalized, an institution, like an industrial complex really of institutionalization of women and children in Ireland. And I came across, when I was doing the research for my little bit of an introduction, to a book that was written by Paul Redmond called Mother and Baby Homes in Ireland, a standard reference guide and timeline of mother and baby homes adoption and the treatment of single mothers and their children in Ireland from 1739 to 2015. And I suppose that sometimes what gets lost in the scale of the horror, the torture, the abuse that was done to women and children, and indeed men too, in this country, sometimes what we lose in that, this was a money-making enterprise by the religious institutions, and that rather than facilitating a system where children were fostered into loving homes, instead it was far more profitable for the religious institutions, more expensive for the state too, but more profitable to actually incarcerate them in these awfully cruel places. So this is just a direct quote from the book. As can be seen clearly in the local government records, the government issued generous grants and payments to the Catholic orders who ran the institutions. The religious run institutions were paid on a per capita basis by the state, and they were always pressurizing the government for new inmates. And so all arms of state, the local authorities, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children's inspectors, or the Cruelty Man, which so many people will have been familiar with as children, as the ultimate threat. The Gardaí and the courts obliged by committing an average of over 1,000 children a year to the institute and to the industrial schools, women via courts or unofficial means to the Magdalene laundries, and generally making life impossible for single mothers and snatching their children at the slightest pretext, and not just single mothers, of course, but the children of the poor more generally. A vicious cycle ensued as the institutions grew on the back of the generous grants and per capita payments, and therefore demanded more and more inmates, while the various branches of government were trapped into sending ever more inmates to feed the monster they'd created. We often hear when people are talking of the religious behavior in the past and the actions of the church and the various orders that, well, they were providing a service for the people, well, as if that they were kind of driven by some kind of a greater drive to do good in society and to provide for the poor, when the opposite, in fact, was the truth. And of course, how convenient that they banned contraception so that they kept women producing ever more children, which then were dragged off the streets and stuck into institutions and provided as free labor and victims of sexual abuse. So with that cheerful thought, let's, I'm not meaning it's, I apologize. I don't, obviously I'm not being humorous about this, but it's just the sheer extent of the absolutely depraved treatment of women and children in this country never ceases to amaze me. And the reality is, until we face the truth of that, rip off that bandage, we're never going to be able to really heal as a people. And we need to allow that for the survivors and the children of survivors. So with that, we're going to move first, and we're going to be talking to Anna Corrigan. And Anna Corrigan is the PR of the Tuam Babies Family Group. And she's also been awarded a medal from Trinity Philosophical Society for her human rights work and activism. She's an amazing woman who has been at the forefront of the fight for justice for the women and babies of Tuam in particular, but of course that was really the incident that really to a lot of people shocked the world, and it's been so vital in revealing some of the horror with which this country has been burdened. Thank you, Anna. Talk to you now.
Hello. Hello, my name is Anna Corrigan, and thank you, Christine, for inviting me to participate in this. It's a great opportunity to be given a voice because, as you know, women have been voiceless for so long, and around this issue we're facing a wall of silence. So yeah, any time we can come up for air, it's really good. I'm going to start with my own background. I didn't spend any time in any of the homes, but I am an intergenerational survivor of my mother and my father, who are both passed through the system. My father, like the children you referred to earlier on, my father's mother had died of tuberculosis, and the children were outside playing, and the cruelty man came along, and he was taken, and his two siblings. He was 7, his sister was 6, and his brother was 5. They were marched to the courts. The children were actually brought to the courts, and they were charged and sentenced to 10 years each in industrial homes. He never seen his sister again. My Auntie Molly, she died in the industrial home in Lochray at 13 years of age, and nobody can tell me where she's buried. And then my mother was Bridget Dolan, and she gave birth to 2 children in the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. My brother John was born in 1946, normal and healthy, and by the time he was 13 months old, he was emaciated with a voracious appetite, and he was dead at 16 months from the measles. He's listed on the 796 death register. My other brother, William, was born in 1950, and he died at 7 months old. But he's not on the 796 because he doesn't have a death certificate. He doesn't have a reason for death, no medical certification of death, no nothing. Believed illegally adopted to America because his dates of birth, mother's dates of birth had been changed. So I've heard through the community that that's indicative of setting them up for illegal adoption. So when they come back tracing, they wouldn't know where to start. So that's basically a small introduction to my background. I knew nothing about my family history until 2012 when I went to Bernardo's. I had some inkling about my father because I've older cousins, knew nothing about my mother. And I received all this information and then I started to my research from then on. So that was 2012 and it coincided with the time that Catherine had started her work. So I brought the two cases of my brothers to the police and they're open police cases since 2013, 2014. Now, I'd like to go on and I'd like to address what we're talking about this evening. That's enough about my background. I mean, it's all been out there anyway. So I'm going to start. I've had to put this together because the topic and the issue is so big that to bring it all together is quite difficult because normally when we're speaking about June, but we're not seeing the bigger picture. So just bear with me here while I start. So when I brought the story of my mother and the work of Catherine Corliss to Alison O'Reilly in May 2014, the story of the 796 children dumped in a septic tank in June broke and brought world attention onto what was happening in Ireland around the treatment of women and children by the religious and the Irish state. It generated shock and horror. For the first time, these issues had hit the world stage, and Ireland could no longer work to resolve these matters out of the limelight. The world was watching, and even more frightening, the world media was watching. Living in Ireland was a dangerous place for a woman, controlled by a patriarchal state and misogynistic church. What chance did you have? If you were a good woman and you followed the rules, you were reasonably safe. Be a good girl, get married, give your husband his conjugal rights, have loads of children, despite the toll on your body, go to regular religious services and you'll be okay. But step outside that prescribed regime and woe betide you. Ireland had ways of making you pay. Nothing legal, of course, but nonetheless, you didn't have any right to complain. If you came from the lower order, that being the poor class, that was the end of life as you knew it. They had big places behind 10-foot walls to put you in. If you were good looking and temptation to men, but maybe the Magdalen home might suit you. If you got pregnant outside wedlock, then it was off to the mother and baby home or the county home. If there was a death or a breakup in your family, then off with the children to the industrial homes. And there was also the mental homes for those who spoke out. What chance did you have? Suffer, do penance, repent, and perhaps someday you might get your freedom back. Perhaps. This all went on under the controlling eye of the state, who colluded and encouraged these practices. In fact, they paid the religious to enforce their warped and twisted regime, which they willingly did for a headage payment. Money's to be made. So that was that for the time that was, swept under the carpet until the pile got so big and women got a voice, albeit a small one, and began to speak. There were men and women too who had suffered as children who also spoke out. Then came the inquiries, the quasi-legal bullshit, done without ever thinking about one of the maxims of law. I'm not proficient in Latin, but I'll try and pronounce it. Nemo judex in causa sua. No one is a judge in their own cause. It's a principle of natural justice that no person can judge a case in which they have an interest. The government were judging themselves, albeit through a quasi-legal system they set up and they paid for, but who worked independently. Now there's the joke. There was a very salient question at the heart of all this, which none of these inquiries addressed. Did the state hold the actions of the church to be legal or illegal? Ergo, they were either lawful or unlawful, and then by default they were either civil or criminal liability. But why would they, given that they funded the system? and this would make them liable and culpable. So that was out the window. So we had the Ryan report into what happened in the industrial schools. They handed out paltry payments to survivors of these homes with the caveat that you cannot speak about how much you received or you'd face legal action and you could not follow up through the courts. Blackmail, job done, nothing to say, move on. Next came the Magdalene inquiry into what happened in the laundries. These passed off without too much fuss. A mass grave which contained the bodies of women who the religious could barely identify and a number they could not. Still, none of that mattered. They gave a license to the nuns and the builders to exhume them, and they were subsequently cremated. Job done, move on, nothing to see here. Now we have the mother and baby homes to deal with. One has to wonder why they were not all dealt with together, given that this was a machine that ran on the blood, sweat, and tears of the poor, innocent women and children. Perhaps it would have been too much for the good people of Ireland to swallow in one go. Or was there a more sinister reason? Of course there was. If you join the dots, you'll see the whole picture of how the industry worked. Slavery, forced labour, torture, drug trials, baby formula trials, bodies to anatomy departments of hospitals, sexual abuse, fraud, sale of children, enforced disappearance, denials of freedom, you name it, they did it. Oh, and let's not forget the other institution that was involved in mental health. We haven't even looked at that yet. Imagine if you put all those together, what would you have? Crimes against humanity? And let's throw in genocide. Egregious breaches of human rights, but the government didn't see it that way, or perhaps they did. Still, they had tribunals and inquiries headed by people they employed, never thinking to bring in outside people to cast a cold clinical eye on what had happened. Perhaps international experts in human rights law. Now, there's the thing. So in 2015, the Mother and Baby Home Commission commenced, and we got the results in October 2020. And that was a first. Testimonies by survivors altered beyond all recognition. Tapes of survivors' testimony lost, then found. A lot of anecdotal findings. No evidence of abuse. No babies illegally adopted or sold. On and on. Spare me. Paid employees of the government refusing to answer to the government or the taxpayer who funded them. But sure, that's all right. Women like Philomena Lee having to go to court about the report while the state throws money at legal defences. Survivors still waiting for promised restitution and some form of compensation. What has happened to the government action plan? Well, perhaps maybe next year. Delay till we all die and go away seems to be the government strategy. But none of that matters. Are we doing something? We have bills now on the floor of the Parliament about adoptions and inappropriate burials, all the while denying us the right to go outside this country to seek justice, as you must exhaust every avenue within the state. And still we wait. Oppression and suppression of our human rights under the ECHR, UN Human Rights Conventions, Nuremberg Codes, GDPR, and last but by no means least, the Irish Constitution. Human rights which were denied to the women and the children are now denied to all who search. This is not a democracy. We live in a republic, and these that are elected are our servants, not our masters. This is history repeating itself. No truth, no justice, no accountability, no prosecutions, and no restitution to date. Then we have the debacle going on around what's to be done with the Tuam pit, which is very close to my heart, given the fact that that's where I advocate for. Despite there being an exhumation and carbon dating and the taking of body parts in 2016 and 2017, covered up again by the Galway County Council with a couple of ton of soil and reseeded. One has to ask why. Expert technical groups reports vox populi as to what to do with the remains, the Galway County Council trying to make it a protected architectural site during the excavation, already having designated an archaeological site under the Monuments Act in 2006, reseeding the site, and now we need laws to proceed, denying us, the families, our rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. We met with Minister Zappone in 2017. It was a very powerful meeting. She was together with Simon Coveney and the CEO of the Galway County Council. She was shocked and appalled, and she professed her shock, and she said that yes, we would have the bodies. She made a commitment that the bodies would be exhumed. That commitment was never honoured. That was 2017. Now this is 2021. So this has been going on forever. And also Simon Coveney made commitments to help survivors at this, that he would actually provide them with counselling service, etc. And now 2021, we still wait. We're in no different position than we were. We've heard a lot of hot air, a lot of talk, and still we wait. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was a tortuous tale of what you had to go to trying to get any kind of justice, and the struggle still continues. It's very clear.